Today I want to talk about patience. Someone did ask for that topic to come up at some point, and so today's the day. And, one of the things that we can always say is that the Buddha said that patient endurance was the highest austerity. And of course, he wasn't recommending austerities that harm the body or harm us. He was interested in our being restrained and disciplined in ways that really help our mind and help our whole being. And we all know what it feels like to be patient, and we all know what it feels like to be impatient. And one of the things that might be helpful to reflect on is, like, when do we become impatient? And one way to look at it is to think about how it feels to be really grounded in the present moment with mindfulness and clear comprehension and really paying attention and caring about what's happening right now in front of us, and how that's a kind of manifestation of patience. As we really listen to someone and care about what they're telling us and care about them, or we really care about the activity that we're engaged in at the time, give it attention. And we can do this with anything, regardless of how mundane it may seem. It's a little bit like when Ajahn Ganha would say, would do everything as a gift. It's like, in a way, another way of looking at that is how we can approach everything with our attention and our care. And that this is actually a way of being patient, of really listening. And the impatience is often about running into the future. We want to be done with this, or we want to be on to the next thing. And all of us, I assume, I know for myself, I can spend a lot of time in that mode. And, to really think about how it feels. Of course we plan and we, think about the things we have to do and all of that, but we can even do that from two different perspectives. We can do it from a way of being present with that planning here in the present moment, rather than the mind pushing to be somewhere else, to do something else. Now, one of the things that got mentioned this morning is experiencing grief or sadness, or at least I made that assumption, I guess. And we all have, various things that we're working with all the time. And, what's it like to be patient with our feelings, our mental states? There are some definite guidelines that the Buddha gave around this, that we want to be patient with many things, but there are some things we shouldn't be patient with. And so when the Buddha talked about patience, there are a few places in the Anguttara Nikaya, for example, where he talked about the importance of being patient. And he said that we should be patient with the kinds of things that we experience in our environment, like cold and heat and flies, mosquitoes, wind, burning sun, and reptiles, creeping things, and patient with unpleasant, harsh, or rude speech that we're hearing. He talked frequently about being patient with what is the physical pains that arise in the body. He said things like, painful, racking, sharp, piercing, harrowing, disagreeable feelings that sap our vitality, and then, patiently enduring that. And of course, it doesn't mean that we look for or enhance painful feeling, or we avoid relieving it. The Buddha's not saying that at all. There weren't a lot of ways to relieve painful feeling back in the day of the Buddha. We have many more options around that now. And I think he would agree that it's good to try to make the body as comfortable as we can without losing our clarity and mindfulness, if possible. But still, there's always discomfort in human life that we can practice patience with, and if we do, we gain more serenity of mind, which is important. In another place, he talks about being patient with all of the input that comes in: sounds, sights, smells, tastes, what we touch, what touches us on the body, and how to be patient with that. And of course, a lot of times that's where we become impatient because we don't want to hear what we're hearing or see what we're seeing, and so on. And he also, of course, talked a lot about guarding the mind so that we use sense restraint. We can try to keep what's coming in wholesome and take care of that, but we can't always control that. And especially when we're around other people and they are behaving in ways that are uncomfortable for us, then can we be patient? Can we be caring and look more deeply into what's actually happening, perhaps, so that we can understand better what's motivating people and their expressions. So in that same vein, the Buddha had a few interactions with some people who came to him who were angry or upset, and it's a little series in the connected discourses in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the book of sevens, or the seventh book, and this is Sutta 3. The first one is about this person named from the Bharadvaja clan who came and became a monk. And then the second sutta in the series is of another person from that same clan hearing about this guy becoming a monk, and he was really angry, and he goes to the Buddha and he's very angry, and he's being very rude and giving the Buddha a hard time. And that's the one that's quite famous. You probably have heard it, where the Buddha says to him, "So do you ever have guests come to your house, and do you give them food?" And he says yes. And the Buddha says, what happens if they don't accept your food or eat it? Who does it belong to? And he said, well, then it belongs to me. And he said, that's how I am feeling about this scolding you're giving me. I'm not partaking in it, and it's still yours. And so that's a kind of famous one. But then the one I want to talk about today, where he really mentions being patient, is the one that comes after that. So that guy who the Buddha talked to about, giving a gift and not being received, he was so impressed that he became a monk on the spot. And then this other person from the same clan, the Bharadvaja clan, was angry and came to the Buddha. And this time, this one, his name is Bharadvaja the Fiend. So he's not a very nice guy apparently, but he comes to the Buddha and he's angry and displeased, and he's abusing and insulting the Buddha with rude and harsh speech. And the Buddha is silent. And then he says, "You're beaten, ascetic. You're beaten. Like I've done you in kind of thing. And the Buddha says, "Ha, I won," thinks the fool when speaking with harsh words. Patience is the true victory for those who understand. When you get angry at an angry person, you just make things worse for yourself. When you don't get angry at an angry person, you win a battle hard to win. When you know that the other is angry, you act for the good of both yourself and the other if you're mindful and stay calm. People unskilled in Dhamma consider one who heals both oneself and the other to be a fool. And then at this point, this man is really impressed. I mean, we have to kind of think the Buddha's presence must have had such an impact, because right there he asks to go for refuge and to ordain as a monk, and he ordains as a monk. And then as with the other two who came before him, it wasn't long before he became enlightened. And so, you know, but these words are so beautiful, I think. No wonder he was impressed that this is how we protect ourselves and others, by not coming back with anger when people are angry with us. There's another sutta. This was in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses. It's in the Book of Fours, number 164. And the Buddha talks about 4 modes of practice. He said the impatient practice, the patient practice, the taming practice, and the calming practice. And he says, so what is the impatient practice? Here, when someone insults you, you insult them. When they scold you, you scold them, and when they argue with you, when they pick an argument with you, you argue with them. This is called the impatient practice. And what is the patient practice? Here, someone does not insult one who insults them. Do not scold one who scolds them. They don't argue with someone who picks an argument with them. This is called the patient practice. And what is the taming practice? Here, having seen something with your eyes, you don't grasp at it. And if we left the eyes unrestrained, bad, unwholesome states of longing and dejection might invade the mind. So one practices restraint and guards the eyes, guards the eye faculty, and undertakes restraint of the eye faculty. The same with the sounds and the ears, the smells and nose, the tastes and the tongue, and those objects felt by the body and the body. And here he includes the thoughts of the mind. So when you have a mental phenomenon, you don't grasp at the features and marks of it. You can just let it pass through. And then he says, this is the taming practice. And what is the calming practice? And this is where we get the guidance on when to not be patient. He said that when one does not, for the calming practice, one does not tolerate an arisen thought of desire, obliterate it. They don't tolerate an arisen thought of ill will. They don't tolerate an arisen thought of harming. And they don't tolerate any bad, unwholesome states whenever they arise. They abandon them, dispel them, calm them down. Basically put an end to them. This is the calming practice. These are the 4 modes of practice. So we start to get this sense from the Buddha of what it's like to train the mind and to develop patience, and why we would want to. That we can really be much more grounded, happy, peaceful, and we can also be a better friend. And the Buddha talks about friendship in regard to patience. He said you want to have a friend who gives what it's hard to give, who does what's hard to do, and patiently endures what's hard to endure. And of course, that's the kind of person we want to be also, to really be able to be there through thick and thin. And it's an enormous gift. Of course, patience is identified as one of the 10 paramitas, the paramis, they called in Thai. Those qualities that were identified. This came after the Buddha's time, but these qualities that were identified as the ones that must have been cultivated by the Buddha to become a Buddha. And I think Ajahn Brahmali's kind of idea about this is, can you imagine how people felt when the Buddha passed away? Like they've lost this incredible teacher. And they still had all of his teachings, and they did a really superb job of maintaining those and passing them down, but to have that feeling of loss. And Ajahn Brahmali says, you can imagine that they really started really looking at how did the Buddha do it? How did he come to that deep understanding and knowledge, direct experience of the Dhamma? He must have been cultivating these qualities for lifetimes that made it possible to do that. And then they started to think about what are those qualities, and patience obviously being one of them. And it's really I think really something we could cultivate for a whole lifetime. Just putting our attention on that, I think could be very beneficial for any of us. And especially as we think of it, as I started, as a way of addressing, or a way of entering into mindfulness and clarity, to remind ourselves when we're feeling agitated and impatient, that can just come back to being patient. Is it possible to just come back to this moment and what we have present here now, calmly, kindly. I think patience has quite a lot of kindness in it, and as I was looking at the various mentions of patience in the suttas, I noticed there were 2 different words in Pali that got used. The khanti, which is the one that's referred to as a parami. What's the English for parami? Perfections, like the 10 perfections. And that's khanti, but then there's also this word kama, which is khama. It's not the action word, it's this other word, and they both include in their definitions, patience, endurance, forbearance, but also forgiveness. And I find that interesting. Patience has a lot to do with forgiveness. That when we're really patient, there's a There's an understanding that comes, there's a kindness that comes, and there's an ability and a willingness to forgive. So I think one thing to reflect on is, how can I do this with others, and how can I do this with myself? There's always, no matter how much we've done or how hard we've tried, there's always a way that the mind can say it's not enough. Especially when we look back and we can't change the past. But to be able to then bring about that collection of qualities: patience, kindness, forgiveness, acceptance, understanding. And this, I think, really is the highest austerity. This is the really, with the way the Buddha talked about it, kind of the bedrock of the development on the path. That we really, this is a integral part of being happy and being able to really make progress. So that's my reflection for this morning. And now I would like to invite you to meditate. We just sit for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time for a discussion. So find a comfortable position. Really check in with the body and see if it's able to maintain the position it's in now for about 30 minutes. With contentment. And sometimes when we tune into how our legs or our feet feel, for example, sometimes when we tune in, we find that a little adjustment is needed. Like shutting off your phone. Then we bring our attention to our breath. And we can use the breath as a support for becoming more calm. More peaceful. Both in the body and in the mind. We can look at what do we find here in the mind, in our feelings. Is there a sense of calm, or is there some agitation? Can invite the mind to become more calm, more centered, more peaceful. More patient. So we can have patience with our mind regardless of the state. If it is agitated or kind of down. And we can have patience, but we can also encourage gladdening the mind, reflecting on those things that bring happiness and joy. I think it works more effectively with the mind to invite it, encourage it, than it does to try to restrain it. I mean, it's true that the Buddha has used very strong language about unwholesome thoughts. But even with that, we can take the position of being protective and kind. Kind to our own mind. And when our mental state is calm and happy, informed by wisdom, then we are also more kind to others. So we can just sit, relax, feel, and incline towards uplifting the mind. Patient and content. You're noticing wherever we experience pleasant feeling in the body, in the mind. The pleasant feeling perhaps of just setting aside whatever might be irritating, downpulling, not covering it up. If it's something that is persistent, then we want to turn towards it. Bring some kindness to it, some compassion. And perhaps where needed, forgiveness. And then when the mind is ready, inviting more joy, and gladness to arise. Preparing the mind for stillness and clarity. And insight. That bell ringing might be a little louder than I expected. Was that jarring? I see smiles. No, little head shaking. Okay. Good. So welcome everyone who came in after we got started. Anyone have any thoughts or questions about the topic or anything else, really? Yeah, Denny?
I kept going back to this um, scene of like going from the bedside of my girlfriend who was dying, and I spent many nights there, and was mostly filled with patience. I found a compassion for her that I didn't know that I had in me, and especially she suffered greatly. She resisted any kind of medication. It was an awful, awful death. It was just, and yet I found myself there. But then when I'd leave, and I remember going to the grocery store and getting really, really angry at people in front of me for taking so long. So angry that I almost, but then I would turn it into like, what's wrong with me? Why am I so impatient? Why am I so angry? And then I thought, like, well, I should accept this. I'm just going to watch it. But then I say, oh, I can't watch. It got into this loop of, of like just intolerance for my inability to do better. And I know that sounds crazy, but, but it's just so interesting how it would never come up generally in the moment, but in other moments.
Yeah.
That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I mean it. I hope any comments I make about this are useful. It's certainly an incredibly special, profoundly meaningful time to be with someone as they're going through those final stages of active dying. And I don't know if this is part of what you're experienced, but it feels to me like there is a certain quality of what's beyond this world present in the room. And I think that we are different maybe at that time, but we're still left with needing to work with or be present with and experience some of those aftershocks and ways in which it kind of comes through our system. You know, we don't want things to be the way they are, that we age and get sick and die and all these kinds of painful circumstances. I mean, of course, we'd rather that wasn't the way things are. We have to somehow, be with our experience in a way that we can let that all kind of work through. And so everything you've said makes sense to me. And I appreciate your sharing it. And really being with all those different changes of what comes up in the mind and working with it is the best we can do. It's like, it's messy. Human life is messy. Life in samsara is messy. And there's no perfect response. Or maybe the perfect response is just, you just being with it in the best way we can. Yeah. Thank you. I know for myself, I found reflecting on this topic useful. It's always helpful to remind myself about patience. It's an ongoing practice, isn't it? I think what I mostly noticed, because for me right now in our situation here, we still have a lot of work projects and things to plan and think about in that regard, and it's easy for the mind to run out into the future and work on things. And I think what I really noticed as I was reflecting on patience is the relief. Anyone else? Lisa?
Yes, I'm not sure exactly what my question is, but I was just really struck by the part of your talk when you talked about um, patience having a lot to do with forgiveness, because I've really struggled with that and looked at um, resentment. It's mostly about the past, right? And inability to forgive or struggling to try to forgive. And really explored those feelings and how it has a lot to do with control. Like I want to change the past. And then you also said at one point that not looking ahead to the future. So that's that interplay of past, present, and future is really interesting. I wonder if you could say a little more about that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I really like to notice how it feels, so when we when our mindfulness recognizes that we're impatient, and we can notice, like, what is the mind doing at that time? It's probably wanting to go into the future, or waiting in the future, another way to think about it, instead of waiting in the present. And patience is waiting in the present. And when we notice that, we can notice how it feels. And also when we're reviewing the past and we're unhappy with it, there's also an impatience there, that that lack of acceptance, that and also, woven into it is a lack of forgiveness. And we can notice how that feels. And of course, we have this tendency to oppress ourselves even more than we oppress others, I think, most of us. I mean, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't already living an examined life. When people are not living an examined life, then they oppress others more, I think. But when we start to examine life and we start to reflect on our part in it and our ability to shape it, or what we can control and what we can't control, I think then we start to oppress ourselves, perhaps, or if we're oppressing anyone, it's probably ourselves more than anything. And this too is very much something to reflect upon and bring patience to and forgiveness. As Lisa, as you kind of pointed out, we know that. We'd like to forgive. Sometimes we'd like to forgive, but we don't know how to make that happen. And we kind of have the sense that I can't make that happen by a act of will. And I think that's true. And there are other things that we want that we can't make happen through an act of will. Like we can't really make ourselves experience insight, direct knowing through an act of will. So when we look at what can we control and what can't we control, we can control our thoughts, words, and actions, especially our words and actions. Usually we have to start there. And then we get better at being able to set aside the unwholesome thinking, like the Buddha talked about. Don't tolerate that. But we can't really control feeling. Feeling arises. And the Buddha said, be present with it. Like dukkha arises. Be present with it and understand its cause. But he says the cause can be abandoned. Why? Because that's the way we are thinking, speaking, or acting. That's the part. That's very, if you think about the vast amount of experience we have, that's very little. We have control over very little. But that's okay as long as we understand that. And then what do we do to bring about forgiveness and insight and these things that we can't make happen through an act of will? We put in the causes and conditions that support their arising. And we remove the causes and conditions that support their opposites in arising. It's like growing plants. This has always been an important metaphor because we can't make food grow. We need that stuff really really badly. We can't make it happen. We have to put in the causes and conditions and then it happens. So what are the causes and conditions for forgiveness? There's no perfect formula, right? But in my own life, what I've seen, and I've seen in others too, that a lot of forgiveness comes from practicing things that the Buddha recommended without even thinking about what it is that I need to forgive. So spending a lot of time in monasteries, particularly in Thailand, working a lot with loving kindness and with the other Brahma Viharas. Just as part of the practice, just as part of the wish to awaken and to find relief for our own suffering. And then discover, without even thinking about it, that you see this person that has done something so egregious to you in the past. And suddenly there's nothing there but compassion for them. That the forgiveness happened. And I didn't even know. And so I think this is part of the formula, if you will. Part of it is really looking at the dukkha we experience, and letting it come forward in the heart, and being present with it, just like those first three noble truths. Be with that feeling and allow it to change, and have the patience, the patient endurance to stay present with what we feel as it moves and changes, especially feeling it in the body, until it dissipates on its own. And doing that over and over again without the story. And maybe this is part of the key to forgiveness. We're not focused on what anyone did, and we need to learn this for ourselves, not focusing on what we did or did not do in the past, but looking at the feeling, being with the feeling of it, and letting that arise and change. Because when the Buddha said you see the cause and then you abandon the cause, I mean, what is that cause? It's not about the action, the story, the event, the person. It's about our clinging, our craving for things to be different than they are, for us to be different than we are, and to really recognize that we can let go of that. And notice how that feels. Letting go is always relief. It's always relief. And we can't really make ourselves, again, it's not an act of will. It's putting in the causes and patiently working it through. Thank you, Lisa.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Neil?
So I kind of had a more of a comment, and then as you were speaking just now, everything. So let's see if I can get to what it is I want to say. My mind just will not stop. It just will not stop. And so your your talk was very, very helpful for me today, because it really did get me to focus on, really for the first time in a long time, focus on being the observer of what's going on rather than just going with it. But that only frustrates my mind even more, because I just can't stop. I don't seem to want to not pick up those. They're not even stories. They're like tangents that, I dropped along the road when I was traveling, and now I'm going back and picking them up as if I'm trying to find my way back home or something, all right, but I don't want to just keep spinning off the way my mind does. So I want to try to get to the one thing that I thought about toward the end of the meditation, which has to do with patience. And that I think I realized that when I'm impatient about something, I think it has to do with the situation that I'm in. But it doesn't. It's that the situation that I'm in has forced my mind to stop and look at the situation instead of my mind being able to continue going off on its tangents. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. So the bottom line is that I realized that being impatient is totally a state of mind, as opposed to being brought about by any cause or condition that I'm in at the moment. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
And I mean, I could go on and on about my mind, but nobody wants that. So I don't know if you have any comment on that, on my comment.
Well, first of all, I can tell you, I know you're not alone in this experience. And it's good to notice that the impatience and the mind wanting to run off in various directions and the tangents and continual thinking and all of that is not about the circumstances. It's a habit of the mind. And I think this noticing this experience of stopping and observing, giving the wisdom part of the mind, sometimes I think of it as the adult part of the mind, the grown up, the part that really understands the Dhamma more, giving that the center stage is really helpful. And then noticing how it frustrates that part that just wants to run around is a good observation, I think. And maybe there's a way to understand more about why that is so compelling, that running around, and why it gets resistant. And maybe there is a way to kindly, because I don't think it works so well to try to just oppress the mind with the mind, but maybe trying something that the mind likes, that is calming and inspiring. I find that using Buddho really works well for me. It took a long time to get there, but using a word or phrase and letting that repeat and repeat and repeat in the mind, something that brings up a good feeling in you, like that really brings up a feeling of loving kindness or something like that, and then really making use of this and seeing if the mind will allow it.
Well, that was a part of what was really helpful about your talk for me. I was able to occasionally stop and look and say, like you said, if something comes up persistently, turn around and look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to look and see to some degree I'm sorry, I'm spinning off again. So it's funny because I hadn't realized that this is what I was doing. But there were a couple of moments where I suddenly had brought up a vision in my mind of lying down in a field of wildflowers. It was like for what you talked about as Buddha. I think that was that for me. It was like, okay. Just, I don't know. I don't know what that came up. And I think that was some piece of wisdom coming up and letting me stop for a moment. I don't know.
Well, it's also useful, I think, to look at what's behind the push to run around.
Right. And that comes up for me periodically in the form of a poem I learned in high school. It pops into my mind, and I realize it has something to do with this. And if I could just quickly recite this poem for you, it's called Keeping Things Whole. In a field, I am the absence of field. This is always the case. Wherever I am what is missing. When I walk, I part the air. Always the air moves in to fill the spaces where my body's been. We all have reasons for moving. I move to keep things whole. There's something about that poem that keeps coming back to me. It's like this need for constant motion.
And you have to look at whether or not this is actually true. In a way, the constant motion is how we identify and solidify the sense of self.
Yeah.
So what happens when we stop? And if that's terrifying, that's exactly where you have to look.
Yeah. I think I'm getting closer, but it's scary.
Yeah. I mean, just remember that when we actually see it, it's joyful and freeing.
Oh, you said. Sorry, I don't mean to be. Yeah.
Joyful and freeing.
Okay.
Real happiness is on the other side of that, running away and really facing what we're running from.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for participating.